Hello and welcome to Learning Music with Pat. You know, there are a lot of things that you can do with music to kind of dress it up, to take a theme and embellish it so it becomes almost more than itself. Now, if you're going to do that and you're going to write a variation or on a theme or something like that, you have a basic song that you want to work with and you want to put in extra chords if you're a guitarist, or extra chords if you're an organist or a pianist, or extra scale work, or maybe even change the key of it. You have to remain true to what the song is. But within the scope of what the song is, there's a lot that you can do in order to be able to make it more complicated, more pleasing. It's not just a straight song. So I'm going to do that today. There is a hymn. I don't have to worry about it. It's in public domain, but there's a hymn called Amazing Grace. Everybody loves it. It's the favorite song, the favorite hymn of a lot of people who go to church. And it's a simple song. It's only like two and a half lines long. But I'm going to add to it. I'm going to play you the basic song. You're going to be familiar, most of you, with the song anyway, because it's very, very well known. There's quite a story behind it in terms of how it was written. I'm not going to get into that today, but at some point I might. And it's just an absolutely delightful song. I know people that it's their favorite song, and I know what I was going to do for one individual was just to get different versions of it and put it all together in one recording for her. I never did finish with that. But this is going to be my own interpretation of what you can do with scale work and key changes in order to change a song to be the best that it can be. Not that it's not great to begin with, but just to add to it. And if you do it as a solo, as I'm going to be doing, on a single instrument, you want more than just the melody line. You want something else to kind of add to it. Well, the song is Amazing Grace, and I have here an enlarged copy. Actually, I don't have the whole thing. There is another page that I could add to this because this would be at the size of the notes that I have so you can see it. I would need another page to complete it. But I may not go on that last page. I may just do what to me would be like 2 pages and what here would be 3 pages to give you the idea of how you can embellish a song. You need to keep it true to what the composer intended. You need to keep it true to the melody line, but that doesn't mean you can't embellish it some. First, this is kind of like a demonstration. So first, let me just play the song as it is, without any embellishment, and I think you're going to remember it. I think it's going to be familiar to you. So this is Amazing Grace. That's the whole song. Now, it has 6 verses to it. From my understanding of the history of the song, the words were written first, and then later on, a few years later, the melody was put to it. So they weren't really written together. And that's true of some of the hymns. The words come out first, or the music comes out first, and then they get fitted together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play it about 6 times, maybe more than that, just to show you how you can increase it by, and the only change I'm going to make is an occasional key change, and the rest of it is going to be all scale work. And you will recognize the song, because the way to do something like this is not to take away from the song, but to enhance it. So you don't want to get so fancy with it that people don't even know what the song is anymore. All they hear is your embellishment. Though you have to always be true to the song. So I'm going to begin by playing it, as I always do when I do something like that. I always play it straight. That means I always play it as it's written for the first verse, and then I can add things later. It's called playing it straight. I played the whole thing as I wrote it, and it would be more than what you had over here. It would be that last page. If you look at mine, see, I have to write this larger so you can see it, but mine is this. And it gets somewhat complicated. I change the key 2 or 3 times, and I do a lot of little things with scale work, and sometimes I do a little extra that I added that wouldn't have been there to begin with, but I'm true to the song. If anyone is listening to it, they know what the song is, and one reason they know what the song is the fact that I keep it true and play it straight in the beginning, and in the end I also play 1 or 2 verses and keep it straight. When I say keep it straight, I'm not adding any embellishment, I'm not adding extra scale work, I'm not changing the key. It is itself, it is its song. So what I do is I start off with the basic song as it is written, and then I add to it whatever I need to add to it, keeping bass with it. I mean, I go back to the original every so often and play some of the original notes so you would recognize what it is, and then do some more embellishment, then go back to the original song, so that the original song and elements of it are always there. You never lose touch with what the song actually is. And then in the end, you have the song, I make it slower, and it's straight again. And so you know what it is. If you take a piece of music and you're not familiar with it, and I want to talk in terms of practicing something like that. Supposing you get a piece of music and you've never seen it before. Well, how do you practice it? I mean, this is kind of a long piece. I am going to be actually doing this piece this weekend. So it's kind of a long piece. So how do you practice it? Well, you go through it once or twice, but people don't practice right. They'll go through it once or twice, and they'll say, well, I can't do this, I can't do that, this is too hard. So they start from the beginning, and they start working and working and working through it over and over and over again. And what you end up by doing is you practice your mistakes. If you practice your mistakes, you're going to play your mistakes, because it's a case of body memory. When you're in a situation such as if you're doing a concert, which I often do, or solo work, which I often do, it's going to be that if you practice your mistakes, your body memory takes over. If you're nervous at all, and your body automatically does that thing which you don't want it to do, it plays your mistakes, because you've been practicing your mistakes. You need to section out your music. So when you get to a part, and I think what I'll do is use my pointer and look at this. So you start playing, and this is pretty simple, and then you get down here and you get into the scale work. That may be hard. So you keep practicing it and going through it. Then you go back and you do the whole thing again. Section it off and practice those parts that are difficult for you. If this is difficult for you, then take 2 or 3 measures at a time, no more than that, and practice those measures. So you would have, for example, say that section, and that section is a problem to you. Slow it down and play it measure by measure by measure. Just that section, not the whole piece. When you first get the music, try to play the whole piece so you can get a sense of what it's like, and then section it off and play parts of it. And then when you get that mastered, you take another section. Supposing that section is hard, and it might be because you've got octaves in it. And so what you do is just you play it slow. Until you get it, so you got to learn, and then you add that to the section you just practiced. Now you've got it. You may have to practice over and over, 1 or 2 measures, over and over and over again. Take it slow and practice it and gradually increase your speed. until you get it. Then you get it faster and faster, as much as you want, as fast as you want. Now, a nice piece doesn't have to go fast. It just has to be a nice piece that you can play well. I've heard too many students, when they try to play a lot of notes in a short period of time because that sounds very impressive and see how well they can play. The problem is then they're not playing it well to begin with, and the body memory takes over, and they play all of their mistakes, and it turns out by not sounding good. So you play it slow, you gradually increase the speed until you get it to the speed where it should be, and then you practice it, and you add 1 or 2 measures at a time, and add those to the measures that you already know, then another 2 or 3 measures, add those to the measures that you already know. So you're practicing it piecemeal. You're not practicing it all at once. What most people do is they don't have good practice skills. You know, you can make the best use of practice time. Most people don't make the best use of practice time. They go through it, okay, I can't do that section. They go through it, okay, it's a little better, and they practice the whole thing over and over when they could take the sections of the piece that are most difficult, play them slow, do it measure by measure, get 1 measure good, then get another measure beside it good, then play it together. You know what, it reminds me of teaching children to read. When I was young, we had what we call the Dick and Jane books. And I remember them, they were kind of fun to read. They would say, Jane runs, Bob runs, Jane runs and Bob runs, although his name is probably Dick, Jane and Dick. Dick runs, Jane runs, Dick and Jane run. You see, and what they're doing is they're doing the run part, the name, then they add something else to it, then they do it both together, then they add something to it, and then they add it together with what they already know. That is definitely the best way to practice. So don't waste your practice time. Now, I love to practice. I can practice for hours at a time, but that doesn't mean that most people like to do that, and it doesn't mean that you should have to do that. I know that concert pianists are going to be practicing for hours at a time. Their music is very difficult, but we're not concert pianists here, and we're working on single instruments, and most instruments are single, the trumpet, the trombone, you know, the flute. All of these instruments, they play 1 note at a time. They don't play chords. They don't play chords or things where you have to play several notes at the same time. You're not playing both bass and melody together. You would if you're playing a piano. But for single-use instruments or single-tone instruments such as trombones and basses and clarinets and saxophones and recorders, it's 1 note at a time. I used to tell my sister, and I still do sometimes, with piano, you can 4 or 5 notes at a time, no problem. It'll do it, because 1 finger, 1 note. But when you have most instruments, I call them single-tone instruments, it may take 6 or 7 fingers just to play 1 note. If you take a look at your D on a recorder, I've got 7 fingers down just to play that D. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, plus the thumb hole in the back. You see, 1 note, but it may take a group of fingers to play that 1 note. So if you're playing D, what note do you use? Is it the low D? You have all of those 7 down. If it's a high D, then you have your choice. Most of the time, you would do it with this, and the only finger down is going to be that middle finger of your left hand. This is the 1. And there's no other notes down. And you have to think in terms of balancing the instrument when you have so few fingers down. But then if you want the low D, all of the fingers are going to go back down. High D, low D, high D, low D. And that's the reason why I like to use alternate fingers, because the way the flute will play that D, here's the low D, the high D, you just lift up 1 finger. You don't have to half hold the back. You don't have to take your thumb off the back, because that D, high D normal fingering for the recorder, there's nothing on this instrument except, and you can see my thumb is wiggling around here, That would be the thumb that's on the thumb hole in the back. It's not on there because I can't use it and get that D. That D has to be just one note and that's all. So you have the problem of balancing it and then getting all your fingers down. Say I'm playing a D and an E. And when I play that E, I have to half hold the note in the back if it's a high E. So not only do I have to put all my fingers down, but at the same time, I have to pull my thumb down to a half hold to get that high E. Isn't it easier to do the flute fingering? Here's my D, and to get the high, low D, and to get the high D, pick it up. Just pick it up. I don't have to do anything with the thumb. It's simple. So one of the reasons that I do what I do on an instrument like this is I combine the fingerings of other instruments if they work. Now, it doesn't work with all instruments. It doesn't pitch. You've got to make sure that when you do it, you have an instrument that can handle it and an instrument that will stay in pitch if you do it. Because if you're not in pitch, there's no sense in doing it because you have to be in pitch. That's very important. So when I'm doing a run, say I'm doing this run here, I have to be careful how I finger and make sure that everything sounds right. Now, that does require some skill to make those runs, but these are basically scales. And it's going to be scales that are in the key of G because your key signature is in the key of G. You have one F sharp, and that puts it in the key of G. So all of these scales, unless I change the key, and I do 2 or 3 times, then the scale work is a little different. This is where music gets complicated. You have to be able to tongue it. You have to be able to breathe at the right time. You have to be able to play the notes right. You have to be able to read the music. Now, fortunately, if you're creating your own music, you're not going to write music that you can't play. You're going to write music that you can play fairly easily. And if you're very familiar with an instrument, not only, no matter what the instrument is, you know what the instrument can handle. Now, I played in a competition in Boston, and I played the E-flat alto saxophone, and I did an arrangement of something that sounded terribly, terribly complicated. I nailed it. There wasn't a wrong note in it, and I got a standing ovation and was invited to do a concert in Boston with a group of other people that were also invited, and I did, and it was fun. And it sounded like the music was tremendously difficult, but the way I arranged the music, the most difficult parts I put in context with what the instrument could do without too much trouble. And so it sounded complicated, but to play it to me was kind of like a breeze. You know, because the way I arranged the music in such a way that it wouldn't be terribly difficult for the instrument to do it. Now, when I do Handel's Messiah, I usually do Handel's Messiah in a recorder at the end of the year. But the way that I arrange it is I use a lot of half-holding, I use a lot of techniques that I have devised for the instrument, a lot of different fingerings that I have devised for the instrument that people don't use because they're never taught, but it works. And then because it works, I can combine those fingerings with the traditional fingerings of the instrument, which of course I need to teach, and then I can play all kinds of things. I do Handel's Messiah. I do the Alleluia Chorus. I do for Unto Us a Son is Given, you know, and the last piece, which has all those rolling amens, 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 I do all of that with no trouble on a little recorder just like this because I can arrange it in such a way that it sounds good and the fingerings aren't impossible. Well, I better close off. I just want to give you that heads up. When you get a piece of music, look it over, play it over once or twice, and then start to section it off to do parts of it until you get very, very familiar with it. Then add parts two parts, kind of section it off, put it back together, and you will find that you can play very well within a short period of time. Don't make the mistake of having to play your mistakes over and over again. Section it off. Where your mistakes are, where your difficulties are, even if they're not mistakes, get it so you're very familiar with it, and you're very familiar with how your instrument responds, because instruments are responsive. You know, they do respond to what you do to them and how you play them and how you blow into them and how you tongue them and all of that. So you really have to know both the instrument and the music. And you can do that just by sectioning off what you're playing and then putting it all together. And when it gets natural and it feels natural, you won't have trouble with the music. So I'm going to close it here. We'll be doing something next time that's a little different. Please join me then.